The space station called Haven's Rest floated in the darkness between stars like a metal flower blooming in the void. It was one of humanity's largest stations, home to nearly 50,000 people from dozens of different species. Humans had built it 200 years ago as a trading post, but it had grown into something much bigger. Now it was a place where the galaxy came together, where species that had once been strangers learned to live side by side. Commander Grace Holland stood at the observation window of her office, watching a warship dock at the station's main port. The ship was massive, nearly 3 times the size of any human vessel, and it moved with a predator's grace despite its size. Its hull was black as night, and its weapons were visible even from this distance. They did not believe in hiding their strength. Grace was 52 years old, with gray streaking through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She had commanded Haven's Rest for 8 years, and in that time she had dealt with pirates, plagues, political crises, and one memorable incident involving a cargo hold full of escaped alien livestock. But she had never dealt with the... No one dealt with the, if they could help it. The door behind her slid open, and her aide stepped in. His name was Park, a young man with a round face and nervous hands that never seemed to stop moving. "Commander, the delegation is requesting permission to board," said. "Ambassador is leading the group personally." Grace turned from the window. "How many in the delegation?" "6 adults and 2 juveniles. The ambassador is bringing her cubs." That surprised Grace. They were fiercely protective of their young. Bringing cubs to a diplomatic meeting was either a sign of great trust or a very specific kind of message. Grace was not sure which one made her more nervous. "Grant them permission," she said, "and make sure the diplomatic wing is ready. I want everything perfect." Nodded and hurried away. Grace took one last look at the warship and then headed to the docking port to greet her guests. They were even more impressive up close. Ambassador was nearly 3 meters tall, her body covered in sleek black fur that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her eyes were large and golden, with vertical pupils that tracked every movement in the room. When she walked, her claws clicked against the metal floor with a sound like knives being sharpened. Behind her came 5 other adults, all of them warriors by the look of their faces and the weapons they carried openly. But it was the 2 small figures at side that caught Grace's attention. The cubs were perhaps a meter tall, their fur a softer gray than the adults. They looked around the docking bay with wide, curious eyes, their small ears twitching at every new sound. One of them, the smaller one, was holding on to its mother's leg with tiny clawed hands. "Commander Holland," said. Her voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I am Ambassador of the Empire. We thank you for receiving us." Grace bowed her head in the formal greeting. "Ambassador, Haven's Rest is honored by your presence. We hope your stay will be pleasant and productive." His golden eyes studied her for a long moment. "We shall see. They do not give trust easily, Commander. It must be earned." "I understand," Grace said. "Please allow me to show you to your quarters." As she led the delegation through the station, Grace noticed how other species reacted to the... People stepped aside, pressing themselves against walls to let the group pass. Conversations stopped. Children were pulled close to their parents. Everyone knew what they were capable of. They were apex predators, the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. There was a nightmare of thick jungles and deadly creatures, and they had evolved to be the deadliest of them all. They were faster than humans, stronger than humans, and their senses were so sharp that they could hear a heartbeat from across a room. In the wars that had shaped galactic history, they had never lost. But they were also honorable in their own way. They kept their word once given. They respected strength and despised cowardice, and they protected their young with a ferocity that made even other predator species nervous. Grace showed the delegation to the diplomatic wing, a section of the station that had been specially prepared for their visit. The quarters were spacious, with ceilings high enough for even the tallest to stand comfortably. The lighting had been dimmed to match the darkness of there, and the temperature had been raised to something that humans found uncomfortable but preferred. "These accommodations are acceptable," said, looking around. "My mate will arrive tomorrow with additional members of our delegation. Until then, I wish to rest and allow my cubs to adjust to the station." "Of course," Grace said. "If you need anything at all, please contact my office. We want to make sure your visit is comfortable." Nodded, and Grace took her leave. As she walked back to her office, she allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The first meeting had gone well. They seemed satisfied, at least for now. She had no idea that everything was about to go very, very wrong. The cubs were named and was the older of the two, more cautious and protective. She watched everything with careful eyes and kept her smaller sibling close. Was younger and more curious, always wanting to explore, always asking questions that their mother did not have time to answer. They had been traveling for many days and was bored. Mother said, tugging its leg, "Can we explore the station?" Looked down at her cub with tired eyes. "Not now, little one. We have just arrived. You need to rest." "But I am not tired," complained. "I want to see the humans. I want to see everything." Said in a warning tone. Mother said no. Ran her clawed hand gently over his head. "Tomorrow, perhaps, after I have met with the human leaders. For now, stay in our quarters. Do not wander." "Yes, Mother," both cubs said together. Left them in the care of one of the warriors, a grizzled old soldier named, and went to begin her diplomatic meetings. The cubs were given food and told to sleep, but sleep would not come. Lay on the soft bedding, staring at the ceiling. The station hummed around them, strange sounds that were nothing like the familiar noises of home. There were voices in the distance, the rumble of machines, the hiss of air moving through vents. Whispered, "Are you awake?" "Yes," whispered back. "I cannot sleep either." "Do you think the humans are dangerous?" Thought about this. Mother says all species can be dangerous, but humans are small and weak. They have no claws, no fangs. I do not think we need to be afraid of them. "I want to see one," said, "up close." Mother said to stay here. Mother said not to wander, but what if we only go a little way, just to look around? Hesitated. She knew they should obey their mother. But she was curious too, and the station was so interesting, full of strange smells and sounds. And Old had fallen asleep in his chair, his snores filling the room. "Just a little way," agreed, "and we come right back." The cubs crept out of the diplomatic quarters, their small paws making no sound on the metal floor. They moved through the corridors like shadows, using the hunting skills their parents had begun to teach them. Stay low, move quiet, use the darkness. The station was much bigger than they had expected. Corridors branched off in every direction, leading to places they could not imagine. They passed windows that looked out into the void of space and pressed her nose against the glass, watching the stars. "They are so far away," said in wonder. "How do we travel between them?" Ships said, "You know this. Come on, we should go back." But then they heard something, a sound coming from one of the walls, a soft humming noise that seemed to vibrate through the metal. Ears perked up. "What is that?" They found a small panel in the wall, held in place by simple clips. Reached up and pulled one of the clips loose. The panel swung open, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. "It is an air passage," said, "for moving air through the station." "Let us go inside," said, "just to see where it goes." "No, we should go back now." But was already crawling into the tunnel. Hesitated for a moment, then followed. She could not let her sibling go alone. The tunnel was narrow and dark, but the cubs could see perfectly well with their night vision. They crawled through the passages, following the humming sound, taking turns at random. They were so focused on exploring that they did not think about how to get back. After what felt like a long time, stopped. "Which way did we come from?" Looked around. Every tunnel looked the same. She had no idea where they were. "I do not know," she admitted. Fear began to creep into both cubs. They were lost, alone in a strange place, far from their mother. The adventure had suddenly stopped being fun. "We need to find a way out," said, trying to sound brave. "Come on, we will just keep going until we find another panel." They crawled on, but every passage they tried led to more passages. The station was a maze, and they were trapped inside it. Began to cry, soft, whimpering sounds that echoed through the tunnels. pressed close to her sibling, trying to offer comfort, but she was scared too. She had never been so scared in her life. "It will be okay," said, even though she was not sure it would be. "Someone will find us. Mother will find us." But the tunnels were dark and endless, and no one came. Ben Cooper had been working on space stations for 15 years, and he had learned that the best way to deal with problems was to face them head-on. He was 40 years old, with calloused hands and a face that had been weathered by years of hard work. He was not a tall man, and he was not particularly strong by human standards, but he was patient and careful and good at his job. He worked as a maintenance technician, which meant he spent most of his time crawling through the parts of the station that no one else wanted to go. Today he was fixing an air recycler on Deck 4. The machine had been making strange noises for a week, and he had finally tracked the problem to a faulty sensor in the ventilation system. It was not a difficult repair, but it required climbing into the maintenance tunnels and working in a cramped space with poor lighting. Ben did not mind. He actually liked the tunnels. They were quiet, away from the crowds and the noise of the station. He could think clearly in the darkness. He had just finished replacing the sensor when he heard something that made him stop. Crying, small, soft crying, coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnels. Ben frowned and shone his flashlight into the darkness ahead. "Hello, is someone there?" The crying stopped, but he could hear breathing now. Fast, frightened breathing. Ben began to crawl forward slowly. "Hey, it is okay. I am not going to hurt you. Are you lost?" He turned a corner and found himself in a junction where several tunnels met. And there, huddled in the far corner, were two small creatures with gray fur and wide, terrified eyes. Ben stopped breathing for a moment. He recognized what they were. Everyone on the station had been briefed about the delegation. These were cubs, young, and they were very far from where they were supposed to be. His first instinct was to call for help. They were dangerous, everyone knew that. Even their young probably had claws sharp enough to do serious damage. The smart thing to do would be to back away slowly and let security handle this. But the cubs were crying. The smaller one was pressed against its sibling, shaking with fear. The larger one was trying to look brave, but its eyes kept darting around, searching for escape routes. They were just children. Scared, lost children who had wandered somewhere they should not have gone and could not find their way back. Ben thought about his own childhood, about the time he had gotten lost in a shopping center when he was 5 years old. He remembered the terror, the confusion, the feeling that he would never see his parents again. A kind stranger had found him and stayed with him until his mother came. He could not leave these cubs alone in the dark. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle. "I am not going to hurt you. I know you are scared. I would be scared too." The larger cub hissed at him, a warning sound, its small claws extended. Ben did not move any closer. He just stayed where he was, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. "That is fair," he said. "You do not know me. I could be dangerous for all you know, but I promise you I am not. I am just a guy who fixes things." He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a snack bar. He always carried a few with him when he worked in the tunnels, in case he got hungry. He opened the wrapper and broke off a piece, placing it on the ground between them. "Are you hungry? This is food. It is not great, to be honest, but it is safe. Here." The cubs watched him with suspicious eyes. The smaller one sniffed the air. Ben waited. He had learned patience from years of dealing with broken machines that refused to cooperate. Sometimes you just had to wait. After a long moment, the larger cub crept forward. It sniffed the food carefully, then took a tiny bite. Its eyes widened in what Ben thought might be surprise. "Good, right? I mean, not really, but when you are hungry, anything tastes okay." The cub grabbed the rest of the piece and brought it back to its sibling. They shared it, eating quickly. Ben broke off more pieces and placed them on the ground. The cubs ate them all. "There you go," Ben said. "Better now." The smaller cub made a sound that was not quite a word, but seemed like agreement. Ben settled back against the tunnel wall, making himself comfortable. "So you two got lost exploring, huh? I get it. This station is pretty interesting. Lots of places to explore, but the tunnels are tricky. easy to get turned around. He kept talking, not because he thought they understood him, but because he thought the sound of his voice might help them feel less afraid. He talked about the station, about his job, about the time he had gotten lost as a child. "My mom found me eventually," he said. "Took her 2 hours, but she never gave up looking. Moms are like that, you know, they always find you." The smaller cub had stopped shaking. It was watching him with curious eyes now instead of frightened ones. "Your mom is probably looking for you right now," Ben continued. "She is probably really worried, but she will find you, I know she will." He paused, thinking about what to do next. He should call for help, he knew. But if he used his communicator, the cubs might get scared and run. And if they ran, they could get even more lost. The tunnels went everywhere. Better to wait, he decided. Better to keep them calm until someone came. "I am going to stay here with you," he said. "If that is okay, I will not touch you or anything. I will just sit here and keep you company until someone finds us. Sound good?" The cubs did not answer, of course, but the smaller one crept a little closer to him, and that felt like a yes. Ben smiled and leaned his head back against the wall. "Okay, then, I guess we are waiting together." In the diplomatic wing, chaos was erupting. Ambassador had returned from her meeting to find Old asleep and her cubs missing. Her roar of fury echoed through the entire section of the station. "Where are they?" she demanded, shaking awake. "Where are my children?" Stumbled to his feet, his old eyes wide with horror. "Ambassador, I do not know. They were here when I sat down. I only closed my eyes for a moment." His claws extended fully. For a terrible moment, it looked like she might kill the old warrior right there, but she pulled herself back, barely. "Find them," she snarled. "Find them now." Commander Grace Holland arrived within minutes of receiving the alert. She found the diplomatic wing in chaos, with warriors tearing through every room and corridor, searching for the missing cubs. "Ambassador, please," Grace said, trying to remain calm. "Tell me what happened." Turned on her with blazing eyes. "My cubs are gone. They were left in the care of a warrior who failed in his duty. Now they are lost somewhere on your station." Grace felt her stomach drop. Lost cubs on a human station. This was a diplomatic nightmare waiting to happen. "We will find them," she said firmly. "I am putting the entire station on alert. Every security team, every available person will be searching. If any harm comes to them," said her voice low and dangerous, "I will hold humanity responsible, all of humanity, do you understand?" Grace understood perfectly. They did not make empty threats. If those cubs were hurt, there would be war. "I understand," she said. "Please, Ambassador, trust that we are doing everything possible." She turned and began issuing orders. Within minutes, every section of the station had been alerted. Search teams fanned out, checking every room, every corridor, every storage area. Security chief coordinated the effort from the command center, tracking team movements and analyzing sensor data. "The cubs are small," said, studying the station schematics. "They could fit into places adults cannot reach. We need to check the maintenance tunnels, the cargo holds, anywhere a child might hide." "Or get lost," Grace added grimly. "Check the ventilation system too, if they found an access panel." Nodded and dispatched teams to check the tunnel network. It was a maze down there, and someone unfamiliar with it could wander for hours without finding their way out. "Commander," said, approaching with a data pad, "we found something. One of the maintenance access panels on Deck 7 was opened. The clips were removed from the inside." Grace's heart sank. They went into the tunnels. "It looks like it." She turned to, "Focus the search on the tunnel network. Start from that panel and work outward." "That is going to take time," warned. "The tunnels cover the entire station. There are thousands of possible routes." "Then we had better get started." Hours passed. The search teams crawled through tunnel after tunnel, calling out for the cubs, but there was no response. Ambassador paced the diplomatic wing like a caged animal, her fury barely contained. Her mate had arrived early after hearing the news, and his presence only added to the tension. He was even larger than a warrior of considerable reputation, and he made it clear that he considered every human on the station personally responsible for his children's safety. Grace was starting to feel desperate. Every minute that passed made the situation worse. The cubs had been missing for nearly 4 hours now. They were probably terrified, probably hungry, possibly hurt. And then called her with news. "Commander, we found a heat signature in the tunnel junction on Deck 4. 3 life forms, 2 match profiles." Grace's breath caught, and the third. Human. The word hit her like a physical blow. A human had found the cubs, or the cubs had found a human. Either way, this situation had just become much more complicated. "Who is it? Can you identify them?" Cross-referencing now. There was a pause. "Got it. The human is Ben Cooper, maintenance technician. He was assigned to fix an air recycler in that section earlier today." Grace knew Ben not well, but she had spoken to him a few times over the years. He was quiet, reliable, good at his job, not the type to cause trouble. "Is there any sign of conflict?" she asked carefully. "Any indication that anyone is hurt?" "Negative, Commander. Heat signatures are stable. In fact," paused, sounding confused. "It looks like they are all just sitting there, not moving." Grace frowned. That did not make sense. If a human had encountered cubs in a dark tunnel, there should be panic, fighting, something. Not everyone just sitting still. "I am going down there myself," she decided. "Tell Ambassador what we found, but tell her to let me assess the situation first." "Commander, with respect, the Ambassador is not going to wait." "Then she can come with me. But no warriors, no weapons. I will not risk spooking whoever is down there." She made her way to Deck 4 as quickly as she could. Caught up with her halfway there, her golden eyes burning with desperate hope and terrible fear. "Where are they?" the Ambassador demanded. "In the maintenance tunnels. We have located their heat signatures. There is a human with them." His expression shifted to something dangerous. "A human has my cubs." "We do not know the situation yet," Grace said firmly. "Let me go in first. Let me see what is happening before we assume the worst." For a moment she thought would refuse. The Ambassador's claws were extended, and her body was tense with the urge to push past Grace and tear through anything in her way. But something made her hesitate. "If he has harmed them," said quietly, "nothing in this galaxy will protect him from me." "Understood." They reached the maintenance access point on Deck 4. Grace crouched down and peered into the tunnel, shining her flashlight into the darkness. The tunnel branched off in several directions, but she could hear something now. A soft sound, rhythmic and gentle. Someone was humming. Grace crawled into the tunnel, moving as quietly as she could. Followed, her larger body barely fitting in the narrow space. They moved through the passages, following the sound, until they reached the junction where had located the heat signatures. What Grace saw made her stop and stare in absolute astonishment. Ben Cooper was sitting against the tunnel wall, his eyes closed, humming a soft melody. On either side of him, curled up against his body, were the 2 cubs. They were fast asleep, their small faces peaceful, their breathing slow and even. They looked completely safe, completely content. Grace heard make a sound behind her, something between a gasp and a sob. The Ambassador pushed past Grace and approached the scene, her eyes fixed on her sleeping children. Ben opened his eyes at the sound of movement. He saw Grace first, then the massive looming behind her. His face went pale. "Oh," he said quietly, careful not to disturb the sleeping cubs. "I can explain." Did not respond. She was staring at her cubs, at the way they were nestled against this human, at the peaceful expressions on their faces. She had never seen them sleep so deeply, not since they had left there. "What did you do to them?" she asked, her voice strange and uncertain. Ben swallowed nervously. "Nothing bad, I swear. I found them in the tunnels. They were scared and crying. I just wanted to help them feel better. I gave them some food and talked to them until they calmed down. Then they just sort of fell asleep." "You talked to them?" "Yes, I know they do not understand human language, but I thought the sound of my voice might help. Kids respond to tone, you know, even if they do not know the words." Was silent for a long moment. Then she crouched down next to Ben, her massive form folding in on itself so she could look at her cubs up close. She reached out one clawed hand and gently stroked the smaller cub's fur. Stirred slightly, making a small sound of contentment, but did not wake. "They are dreaming," said softly. "Cubs only dream when they feel completely safe. It is a biological response, a sign of deep trust." She looked at Ben with an expression he could not read. "They have not dreamed since we left our—" Ben did not know what to say. "I am sorry they got scared. I am glad I could help." Studied him with those golden predator eyes. She could see more than humans could, Grace knew. They could read heat patterns, could detect heartbeat and breathing, could sense things that no human instrument could measure. "You were afraid when you found them," said. It was not a question. Ben nodded. "Yes, I mean I know what everyone does, but they were just kids, scared kids who got lost. I could not leave them alone. Most humans would have run, or called for armed security. Maybe, but I kept thinking about how scared I was when I got lost as a kid. Someone helped me then. It felt right to do the same." The smaller cub stirred again. This time she opened her eyes, blinking in the dim light. She saw her mother first and made a happy chirping sound. But then she looked up at Ben and made the same sound. "She likes you," said, and there was wonder in her voice. Reached up and patted Ben's face with one small paw. Her claws were retracted, gentle. Then she climbed down from his side and went to her mother, pressing against's leg. Woke next, and she did the same thing. A happy sound for her mother, followed by what almost looked like a grateful glance at Ben. Gathered her cubs close, holding them tight. Her eyes were wet, though Grace was not sure if could actually cry. "You kept them safe," said to Ben. "When you had no reason to, when you could have left them and no one would have blamed you." "I had a reason," Ben said simply. "They needed help." Stood, lifting her cubs easily. She looked down at Ben with an expression that had changed completely from the dangerous fury of before. Now there was something else in her eyes. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. "What is your name, human?" "Ben Cooper." "Ben Cooper," she repeated. "I will remember this name. My people will remember it, what you did today. It is not a small thing. There is no greater honor than to be trusted with another's young. You have earned that trust." Ben climbed to his feet, brushing dust from his clothes. "I am just glad they are okay." Nodded slowly. Then she turned and began making her way out of the tunnel, her cubs held securely against her chest. Grace stayed behind for a moment. She looked at Ben with new eyes, seeing him differently than she had before. "That was well done," she said quietly. "I do not think you realize what you just did." Ben shrugged, looking embarrassed. "I just sat with them." "You did more than that. You showed them that humans can be trusted, that we protect the vulnerable even when we are afraid." Grace paused. "That might be the most important thing any human has ever done for our relationship with the—" Ben did not seem to know how to respond to that. "I should get back to work," he said finally. "That air recycler still needs some adjustments." Grace smiled. "Of course, but Ben, you might want to clean up first. You are going to have some visitors soon." "Visitors?" "The cub's father arrived a few hours ago. He is going to want to meet the human who kept his children safe." Ben's face went pale again. "Oh, great." Grace patted his shoulder and headed out of the tunnel. Behind her, she heard Ben take a deep breath and start following. The diplomatic wing was much calmer now. Had returned with her cubs, and the relief among the delegation was visible. Warriors who had been ready to tear the station apart were now standing down, their weapons lowered, their postures relaxed. Had swept his mate and children into his massive arms, holding them close. But the calm did not last long. Word of what had happened spread through the station like wildfire. A human maintenance worker had found the missing cubs. Instead of running or calling for security, he had stayed with them in the dark tunnels, fed them, talked to them, and kept them safe until they fell asleep. The cubs had trusted him enough to sleep in his presence. It was unprecedented. They did not trust outsiders. Their cubs certainly did not. For thousands of years, the galaxy had known thee as fearsome warriors, dangerous predators who kept to themselves and treated all other species with suspicion at best. And now 2 of their cubs had fallen asleep in a human's lap. The news reached the human media networks within hours. Then it spread to the alien networks. By the end of the day, the story was everywhere. People who had never heard of Haven's Rest were suddenly talking about it. Species who had never given humanity much thought were suddenly very interested. Grace watched the growing storm from her office, fielding calls from politicians, journalists, and diplomats who all wanted to know more. She gave the same answer to everyone. This was a matter for the delegation to address. She would not speak for them. But she knew that something significant had changed, something that could not be undone. Ambassador requested a meeting with Grace the next day. The commander expected to discuss the security failure, to apologize again for what had happened. Instead, had something very different in mind. "I wish to speak with you about humanity," the ambassador said. They were sitting in Grace's office, cups of tea between them, had tried the human drink and seemed to find it acceptable. "Your species has always puzzled us." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Puzzled you how?" "You are weak by galactic standards. Slow. Your senses are poor, your body's fragile. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. By all logic, you should have been prey on your. Instead, you became the dominant species." "We are stubborn," Grace said with a slight smile, "and we work well together." "Yes, we have observed this, but there is something else, something my people have never understood." Paused, choosing her words carefully. "You adopt." Grace blinked. "Adopt?" "You take in young that are not your own. Not just human young, but the young of other species. We have records of humans raising dogs, cats, birds, even creatures from other worlds. You form bonds with beings that are not your kin, not your pack. You love them as if they were your own." "That is true," Grace said. "Humans have always done this." "It makes no sense to us," said. "Among the family is everything. We protect our own young because they carry our blood, our legacy. But humans protect young that have no connection to them at all. Why?" Grace thought about this. It was not a question she had ever really considered. It was just something humans did. "I think," she said slowly, "it is because we see children as children first. Before species, before blood, before anything else. A child who needs help is a child who needs help. It does not matter where they come from." Was silent for a long moment. "Ben Cooper," she said finally, "he has no children of his own." "No, he was married once, I believe, but it ended. No children. But he acted as a father would. He protected my cubs because they were young and scared and needed protection, not because he would gain anything from it, not because anyone would know." "Yes." Nodded slowly. "My people have always believed that strength comes from claws and fangs and the willingness to kill. We respected humans for your technology, your numbers, your persistence, but we never respected you for your hearts." She looked at Grace with those golden eyes. "We were wrong." Grace was not sure what to say. She had never expected to hear something like this from let alone from an ambassador. "Ben Cooper is an ordinary human," she said carefully. "What he did is not unusual for us. That is what makes it remarkable," stood, unfolding her tall frame. "I must return to my cubs, but I wanted you to know that this conversation will not be forgotten. What your people have shown us, it changes things." After left, Grace sat alone in her office for a long time, thinking about what the ambassador had said. Humans adopted. They took in strays, protected the vulnerable, loved things that were different from themselves. It was so ordinary, so common, that most humans never thought about it. But it was extraordinary. Proof of something they had never expected to find in another species. Maybe that was the key, Grace thought, not their technology or their weapons or their numbers, their hearts. Ben Cooper was summoned to the diplomatic wing that evening. He arrived nervously, still wearing his maintenance uniform, unsure of what to expect. Park met him at the entrance and led him through the corridor to a large meeting room where the entire delegation was waiting. Ben stopped at the door, his eyes wide. He had never seen so many in one place. They were all huge, all intimidating, all watching him with those predator eyes. And then broke away from her mother and ran toward him, chirping happily. The small cub grabbed his leg and looked up at him with bright eyes. Before Ben could react, joined her sibling, pressing against his other leg. The adult watched this in silence. Their expressions were difficult to read, but none of them seemed hostile. If anything, they seemed impressed. Stepped forward. "Ben Cooper, my cubs wish to see you again. They have been asking for the singing human since they woke." "Singing?" Ben said, confused. "You were humming when we found you. My cubs remember." Ben felt his face flush. "It was just a lullaby, something my grandmother used to sing to me." "Will you sing it again?" Ben looked down at the cubs, who were watching him expectantly. Then he looked at the adult, at Ambassador and her massive warrior mate, at the soldiers with their scars and their weapons. "Okay," he said slowly, "but I am not a very good singer." He cleared his throat and began to hum the old lullaby, the one his grandmother had sung when he was small and scared of the dark. It was a simple melody, gentle and soothing, the kind of song that had comforted generations of human children. The cubs settled against his legs and listened, their eyes half closed. The adult listened too, their expressions strange and unreadable. When the song ended, there was silence. Then, the massive warrior who had looked ready to destroy the station just a day ago bowed his head to Ben. "You have honored my family," said, his deep voice rough with emotion. "You kept my children safe when they were lost and afraid. You sang them to sleep in the darkness. This is not something that can be repaid." "I did not do it for payment," Ben said. "I did it because it was right." Raised his head. "Yes, that is why it matters." Stepped forward and placed her clawed hand on Ben's shoulder. It was a gesture of respect among her people, Ben would later learn. A sign that someone had earned the status of family. "They do not give trust easily," she said. "We have been betrayed too many times by species who smiled and spoke kind words while plotting against us. But you have shown us something we did not expect to find among humans. You have shown us that your species protects the vulnerable not because of law or obligation, but because it is in your nature." She looked at her cubs, who were still pressed against Ben's legs. "My children trust you," she continued. "They do not know your language, do not understand your ways, but they know kindness when they feel it, they know safety when they find it, and they found both in you." Ben did not know what to say. He had spent his whole life being ordinary, just a guy who fixed things and kept to himself. He had never expected to be standing in a room full of alien predators being praised for singing a lullaby. "Thank you," he managed finally. "I am glad I could help." Smiled, a rare expression for a, "You will always be welcome among our people, Ben Cooper, always." The trade negotiations that had brought the to Haven's Rest resumed the next day, but they went very differently than anyone had expected. Ambassador pushed for terms that were extraordinarily favorable to humanity. Access to trade routes, technology exchanges, mutual defense agreements. Things that human diplomats had spent decades trying to achieve were suddenly on the table. When asked why she was being so generous, his answer was simple. "Because a human showed us who your people really are," she said. "Not warriors, not conquerors, protectors, guardians of the vulnerable. That is worth more than any trade agreement." The news of the treaty spread across human space, followed by the story of how it had happened. Ben Cooper became famous, though he never quite understood why. He had just sat in a tunnel with some scared kids. It did not seem like a big deal to him. But to the rest of the galaxy, it was everything. Other species began to look at humanity differently. They were known throughout the galaxy as fearsome judges of character. If they trusted humans, maybe there was something to these small, fragile, persistent creatures after all. Diplomatic requests started flooding in. Species that had ignored humanity for centuries suddenly wanted to talk. Trade opportunities expanded. Alliances formed. And it all traced back to one maintenance technician who had refused to leave two scared children alone in the dark. Grace Holland watched the changes unfold from her office on Haven's Rest. She kept a picture on her desk now, a gift from Ambassador. It showed Ben sitting in the tunnel junction, the two cubs asleep against his sides, his face peaceful in the dim light. A security camera had captured the moment. It was, Grace thought, the most important picture in human history. Not a flag planted on a new world, not a victorious general, just an ordinary man being kind to children who needed help. That was who humans were. That was what made them special. Ben Cooper continued working as a maintenance technician on Haven's Rest. He turned down offers to become a diplomat, a celebrity, a spokesperson for human relations. He just wanted to fix things, he said. That was what he was good at. But he did accept one change. Whenever the delegation visited the station and would ask for the singing human, and Ben would always come, no matter how busy he was. He would sit with them and tell them stories in his gentle voice, and they would listen even though they did not understand the words. And sometimes, when they were tired, they would curl up against him and fall asleep while he hummed the old lullaby. It became a tradition, a symbol of the bond between two species that had once been strangers. And throughout the galaxy, people heard the story and wondered at it. The fearsome, the fragile humans, and the simple act of kindness that had changed everything. Some said it was fate, some said it was luck, but those who knew Ben Cooper knew the truth. It was just who he was, who humans were. Protectors of the lost, guardians of the scared, keepers of the vulnerable. And that, in the end, was worth more than all the weapons in the galaxy. The story continued to spread. Months after the incident, a historian named came to Haven's Rest to document what had happened. He interviewed everyone involved, from Commander Holland to the security teams who had searched for the cubs, to Ambassador herself. But the interview that mattered most was the one with Ben Cooper. They met in the station's observation lounge, where wide windows looked out at the stars. Ben was uncomfortable with the attention, fidgeting in his seat and keeping his eyes on the floor. "Tell me what you were thinking," said. "When you found the cubs in the tunnel, what went through your mind?" Ben considered the question. "I was scared at first," he admitted. "I knew what were, everyone does, but then I heard them crying and they just looked so small, so lost. I stopped thinking about what they were and just saw two kids who needed help. Most beings would have run. Maybe, but I could not. I kept remembering what it felt like to be lost when I was a kid, the fear, the confusion. Someone helped me then, and I never forgot it. I thought maybe I could be that person for someone else." Made notes on his recording device. "You spoke to them, you sang to them. Why?" "Kids respond to voices," Ben said. "Even if they do not understand the words, they understand tone. They can tell if someone is trying to hurt them or trying to help. I wanted them to know I was safe." "And when they fell asleep against you, what did you think then?" Ben was quiet for a long moment. "I thought about my grandmother," he said finally. "She died when I was 12, but I remember how safe I felt when she held me, how nothing in the world could hurt me as long as she was there. I wanted those cubs to feel the same way just for a little while." Studied the human with new eyes. They were not an emotional species, but there was something in Ben's words that resonated with him deeply. "You gave them what your grandmother gave you," said. "Safety, comfort, love." Ben shrugged, looking embarrassed. "I just sat with them, it was not a big deal." "To my people, it was the biggest deal of all." The historian's documentary aired across space a few months later. It was watched by billions, and it fundamentally changed how they viewed humanity. For generations, they had seen humans as weak but clever, dangerous in groups but easy to crush individually, a species to be watched but not respected. Now they saw something different. They saw a species that protected the vulnerable because protecting the vulnerable was part of who they were. A species that would sit in the dark with frightened children and sing them to sleep. A species that valued kindness as much as strength. The documentary ended with footage of and playing on Haven's Rest, their mother watching nearby. The cubs were older now, starting to lose their gray juvenile fur, beginning to look more like the fierce predators they would become. But whenever they saw Ben Cooper, they still ran to him with happy chirps. They still pressed against his legs and looked up at him with trusting eyes. And he still crouched down to greet them, still spoke to them in that gentle voice, still made them feel safe. The final image was Ben walking away down a corridor, the cubs waving goodbye. The spoke in the language. We were wrong about humanity. We saw their weakness and missed their strength. We saw their fragility and missed their courage. We saw what they lacked and missed what they had. They are protectors, guardians, keepers of the lost and the scared and the small. And perhaps that is the greatest strength of all. The documentary was translated into dozens of languages and spread across the galaxy. It changed how many species viewed humanity, not as conquerors or competitors, but as something else entirely. Something unexpected, something valuable, something worth knowing. And in his maintenance tunnels on Haven's Rest, Ben Cooper continued to fix broken machines and hum old lullabies, never quite understanding what he had started. He was just an ordinary man who had done an ordinary thing. But sometimes, ordinary things change everything. And this one did. Years passed, and the alliance between humanity and the grew stronger. Trade flourished. Cultural exchange programs brought humans to worlds and to human stations. The two species learned from each other, grew together, became allies in ways no one had thought possible. And grew up. They became warriors, as all did, but they were different from previous generations. They had experienced human kindness firsthand. They knew that strength could take many forms. When they were old enough, they both chose to serve as ambassadors, bridging the gap between their people and humanity. They spoke of the singing human in their speeches, of the night they got lost and found safety in the most unexpected place. Their story became legend, a foundation myth for a new era of cooperation. And Ben Cooper. He retired eventually after 30 years on Haven's Rest. He settled on a quiet human colony world where the nights were peaceful and the stars were bright. He never married again, never had children of his own. But he was never alone. Every year on the anniversary of the day he found the cubs in the tunnel, he received visitors, and came, no matter how far they had to travel. They brought their own cubs with them, introduced them to the human who had become part of their family. "This is Ben Cooper," they would say to their children. "He is the one who found us when we were lost. He is the one who kept us safe." And the cubs would look at the old human with curious eyes, seeing not a weak creature or a strange alien, but something else. Family. Ben would hold them gently, careful of their small claws, and tell them stories in his soft voice. He would hum the old lullaby, the one his grandmother had taught him, the one that had traveled from Earth to the stars. And the cubs would listen and feel safe, and know that they were loved. It was not the ending Ben had expected for his life. He had thought he would die alone, forgotten, just another maintenance worker who had fixed machines and kept to himself. Instead, he had become a symbol, a legend, a bridge between worlds. All because he had sat in the dark with some scared kids and done what any decent person would do. He had helped. On the last day of his life, Ben sat on the porch of his small house, watching the sun set over fields of golden grass. Was with him, her massive form folded into a chair that was much too small for her. She had come as soon as she heard he was sick. "You know," Ben said, his voice weaker than it used to be, "I still do not understand why everyone made such a big deal out of what I did." Made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You showed us who humans really are. That was worth everything. I just sat with you in a tunnel. You sat with frightened children in the dark and made them feel safe. You asked nothing in return. You did not know that anyone would ever find out." Looked at him with those golden eyes that had once been so small and scared. That is exactly why it mattered so much. Ben was quiet for a while. The sun was almost down now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. "Will you stay," he asked finally, "until the end?" Reached out and took his hand, her clawed fingers gentle against his fragile human skin. "I will stay as long as you need me to," she said, "just like you stayed with us." Ben smiled and closed his eyes. The old lullaby played in his mind, the one his grandmother had sung, the one he had sung to frightened cubs in a dark tunnel so many years ago. He hummed it softly as the stars came out, and stayed with him, holding his hand, keeping him safe. Just like he had done for her so long ago. When Ben Cooper died, the Empire declared a day of mourning. It was the first time such an honor had been given to a non in their entire history. Ambassador delivered the eulogy herself, standing before the leaders of a dozen species who had come to pay their respects. He was an ordinary man, she said. That is what he always told us, just an ordinary man who fixed broken things and sang old songs. But he taught us something extraordinary. He taught us that kindness is not weakness, that protecting the vulnerable is the highest form of strength, that love does not require blood or species or anything except a heart willing to give it. Humanity calls this story the tale of how they won the trust of the, but that is wrong. It is not the story of humanity earning trust. It is the story of one man showing us what trust means. Ben Cooper did not see cubs lost in the dark. He saw children who needed help, and he helped them. That is all, that is everything. We will remember him, not as a symbol or a legend, but as what he truly was. A good man, a kind man, a protector of the lost. The singing human who changed the galaxy. She bowed her head, and the assembly fell silent. Outside, across the galaxy, humans and dozens of other species looked up at the stars and thought about what one ordinary person could do. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, an old lullaby seemed to echo. Gentle, soothing, safe. The song of a grandmother, passed to a grandson, passed to frightened cubs in a tunnel, passed to the stars themselves. It would never be forgotten. And neither would he.